we're going to start off with Jessel and colleagues in 2019. So, the purpose of this article was to demonstrate how closely analyzing the reinforcer present and reinforcer absent intervals can create a differentiated and experimentally valid single session ISCA. This is one of my favorite articles because this, for me, was one of the articles that kind of pushed me over the edge and made me start to look at varying and different assessment methods, because the value of a single session ISCA or a single session assessment in general is just so strong in clinical work. The speed, it really matters. Like the speed, the efficiency really does matter, at least in my personal clinical work. Whether I've worked in a clinical setting and I had 5 to 10% supervision, 20% if I was lucky, to now I work in a telehealth setting when I'm instructing a caregiver to run this. A single session is just so valuable. They did this by conducting multiple ISCAs and then analyzing the differentiation between a reinforcer absent interval and present interval. Don't worry, we'll get into that, to develop a treatment package based on a single session ISCA. So they did a typical ISCA and then chopped up 95% of it and just looked at the first test condition. The thing I really want to get from here is that creatively manipulating your data is probably going to give you a lot more information than you thought possible. And I really think this is a really good tool to have in your back pocket. So always have this opportunity of running potentially a single session ISCA, because the time to conduct assessments can be really drastically reduced. So let's hop in and let's walk through a reinforcer present and reinforcer absent interval. So this is hypothetical data. And what we're looking at here is a typical ISCA. So we have 2 control sessions and 1, 2, 3 test sessions. So we're going to take this single test condition and we're going to talk about what actually goes on inside that test condition. So imagine that this data point is broken and blown up, and this is what's actually inside that data point. So what happens in a test condition? Well, typically the individual starts in some form of HRE with certain stimuli present. For simplicity, let's say that it's a tablet and attention, just for simplicity's sake. So let's say the individual starts with the reinforcers present. So that means they have tablet and caregiver attention. That's a reinforcer present interval. What do we expect to happen if the reinforcer is present? We don't expect there to be any instances of challenging behavior, because why would there be challenging behavior when the reinforcer is present? However, when the reinforcer is absent, so then there's a removal of that reinforcer, then we would expect there to be challenging behavior, and that's the reinforcer absent interval. So remember, the reinforcer is present, then we progress the EO and we go to remove the reinforcer. So it switches from a present interval to an absent interval. Then the individual engaged in some precursor or some type of challenging behavior, and then the reinforcer is put back in the child's presence. So it goes from reinforcer present, the child has the reinforcer, then we progress the EO and we move to remove the reinforcer, and now the reinforcer is absent, and then the child engages in some type of problem behavior, and then it moves back into a reinforcer present interval. So you can see here that these multiple different switches that happen within one test condition somewhat simulate this idea of having multiple controls and then multiple tests. The difference is that, in a test control in a typical ISCA, you would be doing 5 to 10 repeats of this reinforcer present and reinforcer absent methodology within one test condition. Whereas in the single session ISCA, you're doing all of them within one session. So while yes, you do have plenty of data points, you have to remember you still have a lot less information than a full ISCA. So let's look at what actually happened when we move to real cases. Let's look at some of their single session ISCAs they showed us, and it pretty much lines up with the hypothetical. You can see the reinforcer absent and reinforcer present intervals. And you can see that, like with Graham, for example, there's really clear differentiation. So the absent intervals are much higher, which makes sense. So when the reinforcer was removed, challenging behavior occurred, and the reinforcer present interval was much lower. So when the reinforcers who we're suspecting that have a functional relationship were present, there was no instances of challenging behavior. And you can quickly see at the same time that there is a typical, SBT treatment tagged onto the end of it, and that it was generally successful. And that's repeated for all clients. So what does that tell us about the need of time for some of these assessments, and what needs to be true for a single session ISCA to work? Well, I think that the time requirement is slowly, through the work of Jessel and the team, has slowly become less and less of an issue. I would say actually that time is no longer an issue in 99%, maybe 99%. Time's no longer an issue for the vast majority of clinicians when it comes to conducting solid ISCAs. I think that the interview perhaps is the bigger variable. So in order to do a single session ISCA, you have one chance to get it right. You have one instance of test, really one instance of test. You don't even get a control, but really you get one instance to nail down and confirm that your hypothesis is correct. So if your hypothesis isn't correct, you're just going to end up wasting a lot of, 5 to 10 minutes of that client's time, and then you have to go back to the drawing board. So the key with the single session ISCA is having that really strong caregiver interview, having a really strong caregiver observation, making sure that everything is possible to design that first test condition. In my work, personally, I use a lot of single session or latency based ISCAs, that take maybe 10 minutes total to get multiple different replications. And it all comes down to, I ask myself at the end of the caregiver interview, do I have enough information to be 99% sure, and then confirm it with an experimental assessment? That's just my own personal sniff test. That's not based on science, but that's just my own personal, do I have enough information to be 99% sure that I'm going to need a differentiated functional analysis within one shot? And if I do, then I do a simple single session ISCA. One thing to note here is that the actual process of separating out reinforcer absent and reinforcer present intervals typically is done via some type of computer program, whether that be like a BData Pro, which is typically used in research, or maybe an ISCA app or something like that. This actually isn't that hard of a process to do if you're just doing it on a piece of paper, right? You just have one column that says RAI and one column at RPI, and you can just write down times as you go. It's not easy, but it's not that hard. So it's just something to be aware of. It's not impossible to do this without technology. A lot of times I do them just on, a pad of paper next to my desk. All right. Well, that is what I have for y'all today. The single session ISCA is one of the more influential to me articles that I read about the PFA and SBT process, and I think it's a really valuable article that really helps clinicians take that first step into the ISCA methodology, because the time save is just that valuable. Anyways, I will see everyone tomorrow for day number 7.